guys, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're returning. My name is Chantal, and this is my channel, Sink Me Out of Debt. So today's video is not going to be following my budget plans, and it's not going to be a matter of, going over different ways that I'm doing things. I wanted to talk to you guys about some tips that may help you do this kind of thing for yourself. And this is actually inspired by a conversation that I started with somebody online. And this person had posted saying, I really want to start doing budgeting, but I don't know where to start. So if you're like me, and this had been something I'd been thinking about for a very long time, like, how do I do this? Because I was never taught how to manage money. School does not generally teach you how to manage finances and all that kind of stuff, especially if you were in the American school system, at least wise, not as far as I know. I don't think the curriculum has changed all that much since I was in school, although that makes me sound very, very old, but regardless. Sometimes the thought of doing budgeting can seem very overwhelming and very stressful and strenuous to do. So I'm going to go over some of the things that I have done behind the scenes that I have not generally put on video. I may have talked about them, but I haven't really gone through and really assessed the true nitty-gritty details. So when it comes to budgeting, my first tip is look at your income. Now, if you work, as an example, in the service industry and your pay fluctuates based on hours or anything that you are paid, what I want you to start with is I want you to take your lowest paycheck and multiply that by the amount of weeks that you get paid. If you get paid on a weekly basis, obviously this is 52 weeks. If it's bi-weekly basis, your lowest paycheck, multiply it by 26, okay? And that will give you a general idea of your lowest bare minimum income, okay? This is the money that you can, for the most part, guarantee. Anything that you get, of course, so long as, you don't leave the job or get terminated, there's a number of factors at play. We are, of course, in the middle of a global pandemic. All of these things can affect income, they can affect your budget. But this is a general run-of-the-mill plan. So if you look at your lowest paycheck, you are someone who is a waitress, if you are someone who is dependent on tips, look at the lowest amount of tips that you have made in a week and multiply that by however much. Incorporate that into your paycheck if that is something that you are given separately. But that should give you an idea of the bare minimum that you are looking at for salary, okay? Once you have that number, evaluate expenditures. And I want you to look at where you spend your money. Why? Is it for fun? Is it necessity? And how much? This is the area where you really start reflecting on, looking at how much you spend money. This is basically you calling yourself out on spending money frivolously. You really are. But you want to look for areas that are absolutely necessary and pay attention to any fun stuff that you're spending money on that isn't necessarily absolutely necessary. Now, for necessity, I mean shelter, food, taking care of your vehicle if you have one, or fare if you ride the bus, take a taxi, take an Uber, anything of that nature. Anything that's going to be focused on need-based things. For a vehicle, you might need it to get to and from work. You might need it to get to the grocery store. You want to look at shelter for whether it's a house, an apartment, or maybe you're like me and you are sleeping on a couch in your parents' house. If you're not paying rent, try to put money aside each month as if you were. Try. Obviously, you may not be able to do that. I am not in the position right now to be able to do that. In order to be able to do something like this, I first have to get rid of my debt. That's the first and foremost. But then I want you to look at your fun things. Like, are you spending a lot of money on clothes? Are you spending a lot of money on, clothes you may not absolutely need? Spending a lot of money on coffee, things of that nature. And I want you to really sit down and analyze that number. I promise you, it's very likely going to be extremely painful when you go through and see just how much money you are spending on coffee at Starbucks. It's gonna hurt. Just as an example. Can you tell I've done that math? Okay. So you want to break down how much. I want you to go through your bank statements and credit card statements and note each and every single expense and put it into one of these categories. Itemize them based off of need. Identify them under these, whatever you may consider necessity. These are the three things that I identify primarily because without these three things, you may not be able to survive. But, there may be things that you determine that are absolutely necessary. For some people, if they are, for example, being a waitress or something, you may need to keep up a certain level of appearance for your employer. So things like cosmetics and stuff like that may actually be a necessity for you, okay? But I want you to assess the necessities versus the fun stuff, the stuff that may not be so necessary, and see where you can cut costs. Maybe instead of buying Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, whatever your preference is, maybe instead of buying coffee at your local coffee place, as an example, you can invest in a electric coffee maker. If you drink tea, get an electric kettle. If you don't want to put one on the stovetop and monitor it and wait for it to whistle, I actually have one of those. They're phenomenal, and they can even be good if you're making coffee and stuff like that, depending on your type of coffee. Invest that 20-30 bucks that you may have spent on this into something like this, and then you can go to Starbucks and buy the grounds. You can buy the stuff to make the drink you like. Now, will it taste identical to the one that you buy? Not necessarily. However, I will tell you that there are lots of TikTokers and YouTubers who are former Starbucks baristas, and they will tell you oftentimes how to make those drinks yourself. And then you can have the stuff on hand to make it yourself, and it will be at a fraction of the cost than if you were to pay somebody else to make it for you. I'm just giving you one example. Now, it may mean that you allot one day out of the week to make a whole bunch of coffee, or you can make your own cold brew. I know a cook named Matt on YouTube recently did a little quick tutorial how to make your own cold brew at home. So that's something to consider. And then the day that you want to drink it, just warm it up on the stove or warm it up in the microwave in a microwave safe container. Put it in your thermos, make your drink, and get off to work. You may have to get up a little bit earlier in the morning, but let's be honest, if you have the stuff pre-made and right there on the counter, it's probably not going to take you as much time to do that at home than if you're going out of your way on your way to work. So keep that in mind as well. So really analyze the difference between fun and necessity. Necessity can also be insurances. It can be taxes. It can be anything of that nature. So weed out necessity versus fun, okay? That's first and foremost. And I recommend doing it for a full year, or at least the last 6 months, to give yourself a really good idea of your expenditures and everything of that nature. Next, once you have determined these things, see where you can cut costs. Maybe cut down your visits to get or buy coffee in half. Maybe take this route of buying these things so that they're on hand so you can make it yourself for a fraction of the cost. You know, see where you are flexible with your expenditures. If there's some fun things that it's like, you know what? I don't treat myself often. I'm going to keep that one thing. For me, I kept a subscription box that I get once a month, and I'm like, this is my gift to myself. I'm going to do that $33 a month purchase of that subscription box. Is it need? No, but I need to give myself something to help keep me motivated and happy. Like, the better I do at paying off debt, I may treat myself to go to Starbucks. I, for the most part, have drastically cut down on how many visits to Starbucks I have done up until this point. I was going almost every day at one point, and comparatively speaking, I have cut way back. And for the most part now, I generally only go and treat myself on payday. And I'll get myself breakfast, coffee, and generally lunch, all in the one visit. So it feels like I'm treating myself. And, you know, I've worked hard to earn it. So see where you can cut those costs. See what areas where it's like, you know, I'm omitting all of this stuff to make sure that I'm able to achieve my goal, but give yourself something fun to hold on to. If you're not going to the movies as often, maybe you might want to subscribe to something like Netflix or Hulu or something of that nature, because while it is a monthly cost, it is generally not prohibitively expensive and something that gives you a wide variety of content for your dollar, especially if you're like me and you don't like watching TV and streaming services is where you get your content. That might be a good investment for you. But do incorporate some fun things, but try to reduce them in number. Okay? So once you've analyzed your necessities, rent, transportation, taxes, we all hate them, insurance, if you can afford it, if you're lucky enough to get it through your employer, that's great, groceries, vet bills, if you have pets, their food, medication, if they need it, all those kinds of things. So once you have an idea of all of these things, break it down on a monthly basis, okay? And then further break it down on either a bi-weekly or a weekly basis, depending on how you get paid. If you get paid bi-weekly, do it bi-weekly. If you get paid weekly, do it weekly, okay? Once you know your monthly expenditures for things like this. Now, unless you're self-employed, taxes may not be a monthly thing or even a quarterly or, you know, every 6 months thing. Depending on how you do your insurance, if you have your own car, if you pay the 6-month policy up front to get a deduction, keep that in mind. Look at where you're spending your money on groceries, veterinary. Just give yourself some sort of estimation, and this is how you start doing cash envelopes or sinking funds. by assessing these need-based items first and putting money aside with each paycheck so that when that expenditure is due, you have the money to do it. And then look at your fun stuff and incorporate them at the end, because this is not your necessity. This is. These are the absolutes. This is not. So if you have to cut some things out one month and maybe give yourself a little bit more the next month, that's fine. Now keep in mind, especially for people who are dependent on a hourly wage and pay fluctuates, this especially is going to be very important, because you'll be able to gauge based off of your lowest bare minimum income how much to put aside for each paycheck. So once you've determined all of that, and by the way, in this necessity, if you have credit cards, that counts. Now, I'm going to give a little story. This is something that I dealt with in my late teens, early 20s. I was working for an employer, and that employer was not providing me with my pay on a bi-weekly basis, even though they were legally required to. I had to fill out timesheets, and unfortunately those timesheets had to go through a number of people signing off on them before they got sent to the accounting department in order for me to get a paycheck. Unfortunately, the people who were responsible for signing off on these timesheets were not the most, let's say, responsible when it came to making sure that people's timesheets were signed off on regularly. So they would stack up on their desks and they would collect dust until their secretary would one day go through and clean up their desk, find a whole stack of them, and force them to sit there and sign them so that they could then be sent to accounting or sent on to the next person who was supposed to do it, and rinse and repeat. So I was actually lucky to see a paycheck every 2 to 4 months. This was against the law. After dealing with this situation for 3.5 years, this means it was 3.5 years of not being able to regularly pay my credit cards because I wasn't getting paid every month. I was unable to pay the credit card companies. I was also going to school. I was going for my associate's degree at the time, and then eventually for my bachelor's degree after I left that place. But this was a situation I had to deal with. I want to tell you right now that if your employer is not paying you on the schedule that they are supposed to pay you, please report them to the labor department. Don't let them get away with it. After that 3.5 years, it took me having a mental breakdown and a crying fit that I didn't get paid when I absolutely needed a paycheck because I had to pay my tuition for school in order for the person in the accounting department, not the people who were responsible for signing off on the sheets. The person in the accounting department, when she heard what had been happening, she told me to fax my timesheet directly to her as long as it was signed off by my immediate supervisor, so there was some traceability that yes, this is accurate. Fax it to her or send it to her. She would process my paychecks, and then once the timesheets eventually got to her through the proper chain of command, she would replace the timesheet with the fully signed off version. So for the last year that I worked there, I finally got paid on time. I want to warn you about this. If you're not paying your credit cards on time, if you're not meeting your minimum payments, it will drastically impact your credit score. Try your best to make sure that you pay at the very least the minimum payment every month on time. If you can pay more, that's great. But at the very least, try your best to make sure you meet the minimum on time. Because that, at the very least, will keep your score. It may not be great, but it won't go in the toilet like mine did. It's taken me a long time to get it to where it is and to somewhat recover a bit. So yes, this is counting as a necessity. Now, if this is the difference between feeding your family and doing this, feeding yourself and your family comes first. It won't be great. It'll affect your credit score. But sustenance, a roof over your head, necessary transportation, all of these things are first and foremost. Okay? I'm just letting you know how it will impact you if you don't do this each month. The minimum payment on time. Now, if you are struggling, call them. Ask them to lower your interest rate. Ask them to work with you on the minimum payment. Ask them to work with you on the schedule of when you make that payment. Credit card companies would rather you call them if you're struggling, because they would rather you have to pay them less or lower your interest rate or anything of that nature to make sure that you make some sort of payment than if you don't pay at all. My credit card companies, I ended up having to call them and prove to them that I was not getting paid the way I was supposed to be paid during this time. Not because letting them know that information changed that it affected my credit score. That was not anything that I could change, but it at least let them know that I wasn't being delinquent on my payments because of choice or because I was being irresponsible. And as long as you keep them informed, they'll be less likely to send you to collections, which will be horrible for your credit score. They'll be less likely to send you threatening and harassing phone calls or letters in the mail, or potentially even take you to court. So always reach out to them if you're struggling financially and you're struggling to pay your bills. They will work with you. For your credit cards, look at minimum payment. You want to look at your balance. And you want to look at your APR and any annual fees or even monthly fees. Some of them have those. And organize them two ways: lowest balance to highest balance, and also lowest APR to highest APR. Make the priority the cards that are higher in balance and higher in APR. I have the opposite situation. My highest balance cards are my lowest APR. My highest APR cards are my lowest balance. So you have to work out and sit down and crunch the numbers to see if paying off your highest balance or highest APR will save you money. For me, when I did the analysis, paying off the highest APR saved me more money than if I paid off the highest balance, simply because the APR was that much different between the two. But only you can assess what will work best for you, okay? So run down those numbers and figure out that information. Then, with your cash envelope system and your sinking funds, set up the envelopes you need. You don't need to get an A5 binder and those zipper envelopes. You can just use plain white envelopes if you need to. You can take a piece of paper and fold it into an envelope, tape the sides or staple the sides, and call it an envelope. You can use manila folders. buy white envelopes at the dollar store. You literally do not need to get a binder to do these cash envelope system. Is it something that can help you stay organized for like $20-something? Yes, it can, but is it a necessary cost? No. I want to make very clear on that. I got the binder because I could afford to spend that money. Not everybody can. So you want to make your envelopes that you needed, just make sure you keep them in a safe space. Even if it's a shoebox, as long as you have it marked and you know what it is, you keep it in a safe space, in a safe place, so that it's not touched by anybody or moved on you, anything of that nature. Just make sure you have everything sorted out. Make your envelopes for the things you need. This is first. Then the wants, like entertainment. Maybe you want to treat yourself and get your nails done. You know, things of that nature that are more want-based than need-based, generally speaking. And set out how much money you need to put aside either on a bi-weekly or weekly basis in order to make sure that all of these things are done. Now, with all of that said, you can do this in a digital format. You don't have to do physical envelopes. Physical envelopes are great if you have access to a bank locally where you can both take money out and put money in a cash format. I and many people do not necessarily have that ability. My banks are all digital. The only way that I can put money into my bank account is if it's a check, it's of a certain amount, and I can put it through the app, or I can go to the one branch that's in my state if it's a larger amount and deposit a check that way. They will not accept cash deposits at all. If you need to do this digitally like I've been doing, it helps to set up another bank or two that's similar in nature. So I have one bank that's for savings, one that is for the fun cash or fun money, and then I have my primary that is for needs. Assess the amounts of money that you want to put into each of these accounts, either on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and set that money aside in those accounts. That way, you have your money organized. You don't need a bank account per need, a bank account per want. You can. There are some banks that you can reach out to them and they can help you set up an account strictly for if you're saving up money for a vacation or a big purchase. And this way they're making sure that if you put money into the account, you don't take it back out. That's the sole purpose of that account. It's great if you're able to do that. Me personally, I don't like locking in money and not being able to take it back out or move it out if I absolutely need it. But this is how I'm doing it digitally. I'm having one bank for savings, one bank for fun money, and one bank for necessity. But this way you can assess your budget. You can assess how much money you need to save for these things, how much money you're spending for these things. And this is a good starting place for your budget. Now, you don't have to do it exactly the way that I'm doing it. And even on my channel, if you've been watching for a while, if you've been watching my videos up to this point, you can see that I've had to change techniques as time has gone on. You have to find what works for you. Not everything that I'm doing is going to work for everybody. Not everything that I've seen other people doing is going to work for me. You have to find what works for you. And it's okay to change plans or work out other ways as time goes on. It's okay to change it up. It helps to watch YouTube videos and how-tos with budgeting, sinking funds, and cash envelopes because it gives you a starting place. But it's not something you have to stick to. Some of these YouTubers do have their own companies that they create their own pre-printed pages that you can put in a binder and stuff like that. You can do that, or you cannot do that. You can use just a basic sketch pad to keep track of things. As long as you know the basic outline of those pages, you can make it yourself. So I hope this video has given some help and assistance on how to create your own budget, how to figure out what you spend where, how to figure out where to reduce money, how to save some money. This is just a basic general idea. If you have any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to ask me. I will do my best to respond as well educated as I can. I'm not an expert. I hope this helps, and until next time, I wish you all a wonderful weekend, a great week ahead of you, and take care. Bye.